Hi, I'm Cassie Ovalero, and I'm one of the operations and training officers. I'll ask my colleagues to introduce themselves in a moment, but some housekeeping as everyone should see. I am recording today's session so that we can use it. Why don't we introduce ourselves? I already introduced myself, so I'm going to pass it over to Joyce. If you can introduce yourself.
Will do. Thank you so much, Cassie. My name is Joyce Abe. I'm also an operations and training officer in the Office of Sponsored Research. Welcome, everybody. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Catherine Dunn.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kathy Dunn. I'm one of the other operations and training officers. Nice to see everybody, and I'll pass it to Philip.
Thanks, Kathy. Hi, everybody. I'm Philip DiBiase. I'm the manager of the subcontracts team here at OSR. Great. Cassie, did you want me to introduce? Oh, Joe.
Joe.
Go ahead, Joe Novotny.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Novotny. I'm the director of the International Research Support Operations Office. I think I'm here helping to fill in on independent contractors on behalf of Gladys Villacorta, who's the assistant director and focuses on independent contractor agreements in the international space.
Thank you, Joe. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Today, we are going to be talking about working with international subrecipients. And this is just part one. So today, we're really focused on some kind of fundamental basic stuff to get you started on the path of working with international subrecipients. I'm going to share a PDF of today's presentation afterwards so that you will all have access to the information that we're sharing with you today. The links will be active, and you shouldn't need to take too many notes, but I encourage you to take any notes that will help you to learn. And also, I mentioned before we get started that we'll be posting this on YouTube afterwards, after I have some time to edit the video. I hope that you were all able to access the materials that we shared before today's class. They were really meant to get you started, and there was a crossword puzzle in there that I hope you're able to do. Joyce will go over that with you in a little bit. The goals of this afternoon session are that you'll have a basic understanding of some terms that are associated with outgoing subs, that you'll be able to distinguish between outgoing subawards and other agreements, that you'll understand there are requirements for international contract agreements, or ICAs, as Joe kind of alluded to earlier. And we will get to that in more detail in day two, in part two on August 22nd, but we're going to introduce it a little bit today. And that you'll know the requirements for requesting and issuing an outgoing sub. When you're ready to request that outgoing sub get issued, what is required at that stage. And that you'll understand the outgoing sub workflow roles and responsibilities. That's the goal of this afternoon session as well.
So thank you, Cassie. As Cassie mentioned earlier, we're going to go over some terms with you. So I'd like to start with federal terms from 2 CFR 200.1 definitions. A subaward. Subaward is an award provided by a pass-through entity to a subrecipient for the purpose of carrying out part of a federal award received by the pass-through entity. It does not include payments to a contractor or payments to an individual that is a beneficiary of a federal program. A subaward may be provided through any form of legal agreement, including an agreement that the pass-through entity considers a contract. A subrecipient is an entity that receives a subaward from a pass-through entity to carry out part of a federal award, but does not include an individual that is a beneficiary of such award. A subrecipient may also be a recipient of other federal awards directly from a federal awarding agency. A contract is a legal instrument by which a recipient or subrecipient purchases property or services needed to carry out the project or program under a federal award. And a contractor is an entity that receives a contract. So here we've just gone over the basic definitions from the federal uniform guidance. Please note that other sponsors may have their own definitions, so it is very, very important to make sure that you review the guidance for the appropriate sponsor. Next slide, please, Cassie. So, as Cassie also mentioned earlier, we had I hope everybody worked on this crossword puzzle, but I'll go over the answers with you very quickly. So, one down, I believe it was, carry forward is carry forward. That would be the unobligated federal funds remaining at the end of any budget period that with the approval of the granting sponsor or under an automatic authority may be carried forward to another budget period to cover allowable costs that the budget period, whether it's used as an offset or additional authorization. 2 down was prime sponsor, and that would be the sponsor where the money generates, from whom the money generates. 3 down was capital advance. So at UCSF, advance payments to lower tier recipients cost when these recipients lack sufficient working capital to perform the work. 4 down was subrecipient. That would be the entity that receives the subaward from a pass-through entity to carry out part of the award, as in the federal definition. 5 down is cost reimbursable. That would be an award for additional. I'm looking at 5. I'm sorry, that was 5 across, not down. 5 across is cost reimbursable. That would be reimbursement based on allowable incurred expenses up to the authorized budget amount. 6 across is SRF, which stands for Subaward Request Form. And that would be the form required to request or initiation of an outgoing sub. 7 across would be scope of work. And that's the definition of work being provided, including any deliverables and their due dates. Then we have 8 down, which is no cost extension, NCE or no cost extension. Award for additional time, extending the last or final year of the budget or budget period of an existing award. Then we have 9 across, procurement, purchase of goods or services. The university only has the right to control the results of the services, not the manner of the performance. 10 across is subaward, an award provided by a pass-through entity to a subrecipient for the subrecipient to carry out part of the award. 11 across is fixed rate subawards. So per NIH, it's the negotiated cost per unit, such as per patient cost in a clinical trial or per participant in clinical research studies. 12 across is international independent contractor. And that would be a non-US individual who provides professional services to other organizations. So I hope everybody got that. So next we're going to go into agreement types, because it's important to know your agreement types, to be able to identify different agreement types. What we're focusing on in the next slide would be subawards and procurement agreements. So though our focus is on subawards, we need to be able to distinguish them from other types of agreements. So let's take a look at subawards and procurement agreements. We have extracted this information from the subcontractor or purchase agreement matrix, which is posted on the OSR public site. So a subaward is an agreement between the university and another entity, not an individual, to perform a substantive portion of the project. The subaward principal investigator is responsible for the design, conduct, or reporting of the UCSF project and must be able to meet flow down requirements of the prime award. It includes subgrants and subcontracts. Subcontracts. And And at UCSF, clinical trial or as clinical research, recruiting sites are always considered subawards. I'm going to repeat that again because I may have lost the strength in that statement. But at UCSF, what we want to do is if we have a clinical trial with clinical trial sites or a clinical research agreement with where we're recruiting participants, those sites are always considered subawards. So we will always treat those sites as a subaward at UCSF. Procurement agreements include agreements for goods or services in the form of a professional service agreement, international contractor agreement, or consulting agreement. The university may only control the results of the service, not the manner of performance. So again, I think Kathy did place the link to the matrix, the complete matrix in the chat. And if we go to the next slide, in determining an agreement, and this gives you a little responsibility, who's responsible, and that would be the principal investigator initially is responsible for determining what type of agreement to use. Then the Office of Sponsored Research will review and ensure that determination is compliant with UCSF sponsor and foreign country policies. When do we do this? We should always do this at the proposal stage. Let's not wait until an agreement comes in. Always at the proposal stage, we should take a look at what the principal investigator is proposing and ensure that we have the correct type of agreement in our proposal. And why? We want to avoid budgeting at the rebudgeting at the award stage. Remember that calculation of indirect costs on subawards differs from calculation of indirect costs for a procurement agreement. So if we have, let's just say we budgeted for a subaward that should be a procurement agreement, we just shot ourselves in the foot. We cut off some of our indirect costs, so we're going to have to rebudget indirects out of our direct costs to cover that loss. So sponsors have indirect cost policies. It's very important that you read those policies and understand them. If you don't understand them, please reach out to your team manager. The team manager may want to reach out to OSR Info or to the subaward team. And how do we do this? We, again, read the sponsor's policy. Then two, follow UCSF procedures. And also consult on in-country laws and regulations. So if you know you have a foreign contractor or subrecipient, you want to reach out to global programs or to the International Research Support or Operations or IRSO to, if you're not sure, they can help you determine the type of agreement to use. So next slide, please. So in the first slide, we went over definitions. Now in 2 CFR 200.331, we go over determining factors or characteristics. So according to the uniform guidance, right, non-federal entities may concurrently receive federal awards as a recipient, subrecipient, and contractor. But it's important that a pass-through entity make case-by-case determinations whether an agreement is providing payment of federal funds to a subrecipient or a contractor. So again, a subaward carries out a portion of a federal award and carries a federal assistance. It creates a federal assistance relationship with the subrecipient. Again, it creates a federal assistance relationship. A subrecipient is an entity, not an individual, has performance measured in relation to whether objectives of a federal program are met, has responsibility for programmatic decision-making, is responsible for adherence to applicable federal program requirements specified in the federal award, uses federal funds to carry out a program for a public purpose that is specified in the authorizing statute as opposed to providing goods for service for the benefit of the pass-through entity. Again, clinical trial or clinical research recruiting sites are always treated as subrecipients at UCSF. A contract now provides a means of obtaining goods and services for the non-federal entity's own use and creates a procurement relationship with the contractor versus a federal assistance relationship. We now have a procurement relationship. A contractor provides goods and services within normal business operations, provides similar goods and services to many different purchasers, normally operates in a competitive environment, provides goods or services that are ancillary to the operation of the federal program, is not subject to compliance requirements of the federal program as a result of the agreement. Though similar requirements may apply, it's not for the same reasons. So these determining factors and characteristics may not always be evident. Pass-through entities must use judgment in classifying each agreement as a subaward or procurement contract. These principles are very similar across the industry and should be applied to all extramurally funded activities. So either type of agreement may include human subjects. It depends on what the sub-scope of work is. Again, either one could have human subjects, so you want to look at the sub-scope of work. If you have one and you are not really sure, get your PI's input, then talk to your manager, and they may pull in the subaward team for guidance. We need to document our decisions and why we made these decisions. So you want to make sure you include that with your subaward documentation. And for-profits may need more scrutiny. So they're not always subawards, and please don't ever assume. So on the next slide, what we put together for you is a quick review. It's like quick review tips. So what we've done was take the review elements and then given you specific points that apply to a subaward, procurement, or consulting agreement. So this is more or less a condensed version of the subcontractor or purchase agreement matrix. Remember, that thing is huge. So what we try to do is trim it down and bring out salient points for you to look at. And I believe Cassie just put a link in the chat for you all to get to it. So if we move on to the next, we are going to use this in our example. We'll show you how to use this little tool in our example. So on the next slide, what we want you to take or remember, and take to heart, when working with international contractor agreements, we should take into consideration the laws and regulations of the country in which the work is being performed. So listed here are some examples of in-country laws that we want to take into consideration before deciding to use a contractor agreement in an international contractor agreement. We are planning to explore these in more detail during session 2, but keep in mind there may be foreign government withholding tax we can't pay. Employment and contracts. So whenever we are going to employ in another country, reach out to the International Research Support Office. Benefits and entitlements. There are costs involved that we may not want to pay. Visa and immigration. There are visa costs that may apply. So in day 2, we're going to go over some of these items and show you what risks are involved if we don't investigate these items. So let's go on to our example in determining an agreement type. So our example is the Flying Scotsman International. So if you open up your example scenario, the Flying Scotsman International, what we want you to do is quickly glance through the budget narrative, the scope of work, and the budget summary. And we'll take a walk through that, but I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to glance through. Okay, so in this case, the principal investigator has UCPI has come to their grant specialist and handed them the budget narrative, scope of work, and budget summary from Flying Scotsman International. And that's included in the approved budget of an NIH research award to UCSF. So that's the basis for this example. So again, I want to repeat, these documents that were handed to you is according to the principal investigator for a subaward, and the subaward was budgeted and awarded. So the NIH research award includes a subaward to Flying Scotsman International. So we're going to walk through this, and let's determine whether this is a subaward or not. And also, let's look at some of the risks involved here. So Cassie had kindly put a copy of the budget narrative here. So let's take a look at the costs involved. So the subcontract total cost is $13,486, and that includes consulting costs at $9,360, ground travel expenses in Singapore for a total of $2,900. And then indirect costs at 10% is included at $1,226. It doesn't look, I mean, right off the bat, indirect costs for an NIH award at 10%, I don't think so, for an international sub-award. So now I want to take, the narrative does give us a little introduction to the scope of work, but or key responsibilities. So it does say it provides strategic guidance, decision-making support to Dr. UCPI, travel to attend and virtual meetings needed with partners in Singapore, review draft guideline documents at the request of Dr. UCPI, and then other support to the project as needed. So we'll go over these responsibilities again in more detail. So if we go to the next slide, Cassie's also listed the key responsibilities from the scope of work document. So here are the key responsibilities that were listed on the scope of work. So support the implementation and strategic direction of the CURE tool, of the CURE tool implementation, provide strategic guidance and decision-making support to Dr. UCPI, travel to Singapore for in-person meetings and attend virtual meetings needed with the partners, review draft guideline documents at the request of Dr. UCPI, support writing and communications of the project, and other support to the project as needed. So as we go down through the scope of work, the next section of the scope of work shows deliverables and payments. So this breaks out the responsibilities into by milestone and amount that would be paid. And if you did look at the budget summary, the budget summary indicates that deliverables will be covered at $780 per hour over a 12-hour period. So here they've broken out 3 main deliverables: the stakeholder, stakeholder consultations, data review, provide guidelines. The second one is conduct an in-person meeting in Singapore. And then the third one is review final scope, standard operating procedures and make recommendations. So far, everything we've read, is that pointing to a subaward? Do you see any programmatic responsibility here of the Flying Scotsman? Are they making programmatic decisions for Dr. UCPI, or is Dr. UCPI more or less telling the Flying Scotsman International what he needs from them? So let's use our tool, our new tool here. So look at the quick guide. Did we read about any programmatic work, right? So let's look at our review element, project design and development. I believe the site's not involved in the design of work. And the scope of work appears to be designed by the UCSFPI. So let's look at work performance. Yeah, it's okay, Cassie, just go ahead and highlight everything. Under work performance, it looks like what the contractor is doing is review support of services of an advisory nature. They're more a subject matter expert that the principal investigator is relying on. Goods and services, they provide similar this type of service to others. Decision making, they're not involved in any programmatic decisions. Compliance, not subject to the prime award terms. There was no flow down of prime award terms to the Flying Scotsman International. Performance measurement tiered specifically, tied specifically to completion of the contract deliverables. So remember the 3 deliverables, and with the completion of the first one, they get half of the total contract amount, and then upon completion of the last 2 deliverables, they'll get the other half. Publication, expectation of any type of collaboration or co-publication. And of course, intellectual property, there's no potential for IP to be created under the scope of work. So let's go on to the next slide. Should we go ahead and process this as a subaward? I hope everybody is saying no. I hope everybody's shaking their head. Well, it depends. So there's no effort, no programmatic responsibility for the design conduct or reporting on the project. The budget narrative initially addresses consulting services provided by Flying Scotsman International, consultation, support, and guidance to make decisions, attend meetings. This sounds more like a consultant. Main activities are to provide guidance, review the standard operating procedures, make recommendations, support writing communication. Now that's a little broad, so what I would do in that case is get clarification from the principal investigator, what type of writing, what are they, and communication, what are they doing? We want to make sure that publications are not included in there too. So we want to rule out authorship or publication. Travel to attend in-person meeting and attend virtual meetings. Other support to the project as needed. This again is broad and should be narrowed down to clarify and clarified by the principal investigator what type of support the Flying Scotsman International is supposed to be providing to the project as needed to rule out development of design, conduct, or reporting of programmatic activities. So let's continue on, because Joyce was scrutinizing this subaward, this quote unquote subaward. So the budget narrative and scope of work indicates that the traveler will submit travel expenses with backup documentation along with an invoice for personnel time. Airfare must be in accordance with the Fly America Act. So if we look at all this information on the 3 documents, time, airfare, and incidentals were not included in the budget total. So who's going to pay for this portion of the travel? I believe that only $2,900 was budgeted for ground transportation at Singapore. And believe it or not, $2,960 is the total of a one-way ticket from Edinburgh to Singapore. So it barely covers a one-way flight from Edinburgh to Singapore. Also noted was indirect costs. Remember, I kind of looked at that funny, 10% indirect costs. If this were a subaward, if this actually were a real subaward, NIH would pay 8% of modified total direct costs less equipment, tuition, and that portion of subs greater than 25,000. But this isn't a subaward. But where did this 10% come from? So let's look at the next slide. So in conclusion, right? In conclusion, consulting based on per day fee with travel, airfare time, and incidentals, which are reimbursed separately. So my recommendation in this case, best practice, is seek clarification from the principal investigator during the proposal preparation and also during proposal review. In other words, the person who prepares should have interrogated the principal investigator and left notes for the reviewer. If the reviewer catches it, then the reviewer should go to the principal investigator and collect notes of clarification. So when the award comes in, we know what it actually is. To ensure correct agreement determination and that the budget includes all the costs that will be charged by the subrecipient or the contractor. So deliverables will be completed in 12 hours at $780 an hour or $9,360. So the issue, deliverable number 2, in-person meeting in Singapore, is on the schedule of fees, but only the $2,900 for ground transportation is included in the budget or the total. The remaining airfare time and incidentals were not included in the award budget. So best practice, try to get the contractor to include all costs for services provided in their budget total at the proposal stage to ensure that all costs are recovered.
Okay, so thank you, Joyce. I think now is a good time before we get too far, before we get into our actual activity. I shared the scenario with you ahead of time, but I'm going to share it again in case you don't have it open, but please do open that. And then you will also want to reference our quick review tips that we shared. So let me just get that link again as well. And while I'm doing that, before we start reviewing this and you practice what we've talked about, do you have any questions about anything that has been discussed so far? Okay, we have a question about who is responsible for determining agreement compliance with foreign policies.
With regard to complying with foreign policies, our recommendation was to reach out to AIRSO or global programs because they would have the guidance for that.
Right. So to look at those in-country laws and regulations, we want to reach out to IRSO. We want to reach out to that group and ask for assistance in determining that. Now, Joyce, would OSR do the contact to IRSO, or would we be expecting?
Whoever is preparing the proposal should actually work with AIRSO so that they can provide all the details. The exchange, rather than pulling in a third party, which can muddy the waters, it would be better to speak directly with them.
Based on that HIV/AIDS research collaboration in Westeros, do you think that you have enough information to review to determine the correct agreement type based on what is provided to you in that scenario that I shared? So the answer in this case is yes, we really do have enough to look at this and think about what the appropriate agreement type should be. And we will go through it in a little bit more detail on the next slide. But based on, before I do that and I give you my answer, what do you think the appropriate agreement type is? So I'm saying yes, we have enough information. I'm going to give the answer. I've left the poll open for a moment, but subaward. And that is what most of you said. Most of you said subaward. Why does Cassie think this is a subaward? And a lot of people agreed. We do have some people who think it might be a consultant agreement, or a procurement agreement, I should say. So let me go through these, and if anyone disagrees or wants to discuss a point further, please let me know. Let's make this, I love to make this interactive if we can, so feel free. And again, you can chat directly to one of us if you're not comfortable speaking to the entire group. That's fine too. I know we're recording, so that might make some of you uncomfortable. I can cut that out though. I can cut it out of the recording, just so you know. All right, so let's look at this. And I should say that I can't take full creative credit for this scenario. I copied it from one that Philip created for a previous activity and just adjusted my scope, but the names are the same. So I can't take full credit for this, I have to say. I'm very proud of Philip. I'm impressed with Philip. All right. So let's look at this. When we're looking at the project design or development, the sub-PI, Dr. Brand, will lead the development, planning, and implementation of data entry, quality control, database design, and data analysis. So we see there that Dr. Brand has that involvement in the design and development of this project. When we're looking at the work performance, this site definitely will be contributing substantively to the overall project. So we're definitely meeting that criteria there. Goods or services, I kind of skipped over because I didn't have a whole lot of information to tell me exactly about that. I would have to look it up. So I kind of skipped over that just to kind of keep going and see about these other criteria because they would actually make it or break it as well. All right, decision making. So they control their methods and results of their portion. They do have decision making. They are controlling their methods and their results. When we're looking at compliance, they're conducting clinical trials, so they must comply with prime award terms and conditions. That lets us know that they are going to have to comply. Now, again, and note the bottom there, clinical trial and clinical research recruiting sites are always classified as sub-awards, right? We see that little hint on the bottom there as well.
Hey, Cassie, can I just add to that? I think one thing to kind of keep in mind as well is, with this scenario, is the site really just acting as like a clinical or a contract research organization that's just helping manage the study, or are they performing those functions plus additional functions? So I don't know if that's what some folks were thinking when they selected procurement, and that's a totally it could be a possibility. Maybe we need some more information or you want some more information from your investigator just to be sure. But I think it's something to keep in mind, for if we're hiring a CRO to manage the clinical trial on our behalf, that would be a procurement. But it wouldn't be the CRO that's enrolling the patient. So, that usually don't see. It's usually they contract with other sites to actually enroll the participants.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Shelby. Thank you, Philip. That was a great addition. Please keep it up. I think that those are really important pieces to share. Okay, also, when we look at their performance measurement, their success is tied to the success of the overall project objectives. And that was something that was written in the narrative. They will be contributing as co-authors to the development of manuscripts and other publications as outlined in publications and presentations, as outlined in the publications and presentations policy. So there is mention in there of them being co-publishers, co-authors. And then likewise, they would have IP rights in this situation. And we can see that as they have the publication rights and such. Anybody have questions, comments? Philip, Joyce, anybody? Joe, anyone?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I did adapt this from an actual scenario that we received, where when we got the first iteration of the sub request, it really looked like they were just a CRO and that they were just helping manage the study. But it turned out like the study they actually held the IND. It was actually their study that they were running, but that wasn't clearly outlined in the scope of work. So I just really wanted to highlight that, while you all or anybody, the department who are managing the projects may be really well versed on what the project is and what the subsite's doing. If the scope of work isn't really clear and includes all that information, it may, by the time it comes to my team to review and to issue, we might have questions and might start questioning whether it really is a sub-award or not. And so it's really important to include all of those details, even if it seems it's already included in the proposal and things like that. We are including this in the contract. So it's good to provide sometimes that background information to fully explain, why it is a sub-award over a procurement, especially in some of these, this example where it's like, were they just a CRO or not? And in this case, they really weren't, because they were actually running the trial. It was their trial. So that's a big difference. CROs don't generally hold the INDs and things like that. Sorry, investigational new drug or device application. That's what IND stands for. Sorry.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah, acronyms are important for us to spell out, right? There are so many acronyms. All right, thank you. That's really helpful. And I think it's really good to think about the difference in a CRO as opposed to a site that's really, truly running their own trial. Thank you. That's important. All right, so we're going to move on to our second scenario. Looking at this, do you have enough information to determine the correct agreement type? If this is what you get, do you have enough information to determine the correct agreement type? And the answer is no. We do not have enough information in this scenario. And let's think about the best next steps. Based on what we just saw, the scenario we were just given, and we realized we don't have enough information that we were provided to review to make this determination. What would be our best next steps to help us make that correct determination? What should we do? Best next step. All right, if you said call or email the PI to request more information, you are right. We want to find out what Dr. Alias is doing. What is their true scope of work? So if that's what you said, you are correct. All right, so we talked about, Joyce mentioned the international contractor agreements earlier. And let's just see if you can remember, what are some types of laws and regulations of the country in which the contractor works or lives should you consider? All of them, right? So tax, employment and contract, benefits and entitlements, visa immigration. All of these are some types of laws and regulations that should be considered when you're working with international contractor agreements. Before we move into requesting and issuing outgoing subs, does anybody have a question, a comment? Does any of my fellow instructors or people that are here with me want to say anything? And I just kind of like.
Oh, Cassie, I do want to say something. I want to remind everybody that, like while they're preparing proposals or working on accepting an award, you add risk to the scenario when you're pressured to rush through your review or preparation. so that you don't accurately make a good determination. So try not to rush, and try to keep in mind, like if you rush, there's higher risk involved, just like in the example that we gave, right? It was a loss in F&A because it was determined to be a subcontract when it was actually a consulting agreement, which we could apply full F&A to if we wanted to. And that would be for the prime award. So we want to make sure we don't rush. We want to be aware of the risk involved in rushing.
Sure. I've seen this in the procurement context as well. It's really the same thing. So if this type of term accidentally gets in a procurement agreement and it goes unnoticed, or even if you're negotiating it in procurement, it's the same thing. What happens is it's a practical part of it's just practical. In reality, even if that term is there, it's not going to happen. That there are delays happen. That's kind of I've seen a campus response to that scenario be exactly as I've seen here on a different campus, and that's that we can have that on paper in the contract, but there's going to be maybe we'll pay interest on late invoices and things like that, late payment. But as a practical matter, we don't, as an institution, function in a way to handle that term and condition. So we just kind of have to assume that even if it's on paper and if we assign and agree to it, we can't really accommodate it. So as a result, if it stays in the contract and we sign off on it, it becomes a liability that the department has to take on. There's really no way, practically speaking, in our mechanics of how we pay things out in procurement and sub-outs, we really just can't accommodate it. And so I found that it can be helpful to just tell the outside organization, it doesn't matter if we sign to it or not. In reality, we cannot accommodate it and we will not do it. And so I think that's the best success I've found in handling it, is to tell them that's just not how we function. It's not how we're set up, and we really just can't accommodate it. And I apologize, it's not better than that, but it's pretty standard across the UC campuses that we, as an institution, can't really accommodate that.
Great, thank you. And let's think about requesting and issuing outgoing subs. This is really going to be applicable to any outgoing sub for the most part. Whenever you, any outgoing sub is going to have the same type of process. This is an overview of that process. At the proposal stage, I'm not going to talk about roles right now, just kind of an overview of the process. So the proposal stage is when the proper agreement type should be determined. We should really be determining at that time if it's a sub-award or a procurement agreement. And Joyce alluded to or talked about some of the reasons why earlier. And one of the big ones is that the fact that the indirect cost treatment is different for a sub-award versus a procurement agreement. And it could really affect your budget if you have the incorrect determination at the proposal stage when the award comes in. As we mentioned earlier, we want to avoid rebudgeting at the award stage. Also, at the proposal stage, we're going to be collecting the subrecipient proposal documents that are required for that specific proposal, and also what's required for all outgoing subs. This is an ideal timeline. There are times where maybe it's an after the fact or something like that, and we're not going to have the determination at a proposal stage. But this is an ideal. I like to speak in ideal types. I like to think in ideal timelines, knowing that often things are different than we like. But if we can strive to the ideal, then maybe we'll reach it. We definitely won't if we don't. So then at award acceptance time, the NOAA should be reviewed for accuracy, restrictions, and any needed budget cuts. And those restrictions definitely are going to be something that are going to use special consideration for international subs, but for all subs, you should be looking to see if there are any restrictions. During award administration is when, and that's after the prime award is funded and it's going on, then that's when new sub-awards are issued. That's when amendment sub-awards are issued. There may also be some prior approval requests going on. There's reporting and there's invoicing all going on during this award administration time. During award closeout, you're going to see final award reporting, final sub-award reporting, and final invoicing. These are just some of the things that you'll really see related to subs during this process. I want to break each of these stages or phases down that I just went through in a little more detail to talk about the roles and responsibilities in each of these areas, each of these phases of the project. During the proposal stage, the principal and the investigator are responsible for determining the correct agreement type. The PI should be evaluating the subrecipient's capacity to carry out their responsibilities, making sure that they're able to meet the requirements of their scope of work, of any award terms and conditions, if it's a subaward, etc., and also serving as that contact with the subrecipient. IJHS, because we have many of you here today that also do a lot of this process, as well as OSR. So we have IJHS and some OSR people here today. And during the proposal stage, we're responsible for reviewing that agreement type determination. We want to make sure that it's compliant with UC policy, and with the other regulations and policies that we must be adhering to based on that funding. Sorry, I just kind of had a glitch in my brain there. I said I want a Westworld body, but I don't really want a Westworld brain. I'm afraid I may have got the brain and not the body. Okay, because they don't hurt. Anyways, I got distracted. Okay, so talking back again about what we're responsible for, we want to make sure that that agreement type determination is correct. We want to talk to the PI in the department if we feel that they're maybe not classifying it the correct way. We want to talk to them about that and explain to them what we think. And also we want to collect and review the subrecipient proposal documents, not least of which is the budget. And then the OSR proposals and grants team will be ensuring that the agreement determination is compliant with UCSF, sponsor, and foreign country policies, and also reviewing and submitting that proposal. We want to bring out that subrecipient monitoring really starts at the proposal stage and is the responsibility of OSR and the department PI. We all have some roles in this and making sure that it's done appropriately. At the proposal stage, the things that we need for an outgoing sub are the appropriate commitment form. If our subrecipient is another UC campus, this would be the Multi-Campus Award Commitment Form, or the MCA. If the subrecipient is not another UC campus and is an FDP Expanded Clearinghouse member, then we would be collecting the letter of intent. If the subrecipient is not a UC campus nor an FDP Expanded Clearinghouse member, we would be collecting the subrecipient commitment form. All of these forms are on the Subaward Proposal Toolkit, which is linked on this page, and you'll get a PDF of this after today's session, as well as on our forms page, on our website, and on the slide here. We also need a statement or scope of work, and there is a link to a sample on this slide. We need their budget and budget justification, and other information is applicable based on the prime sponsor and based on the project. This could be their F&A or indirect cost information. If it's an NIH multiple PDPI, it could be that assurance form. If it's NIH, also the NIH BioSketch, or for other sponsors, the CV. And for NIH, this is for all key personnel. If it's NIH, again, we have facilities and resources and equipment. And again, this is that prime sponsor funding, where the funding is originated from. That it was one of our terms earlier in our crossword puzzle. And also, we could be requesting letters of support if required, applicable. We should not rely on international subrecipients to understand the federal rules, and we may need to be providing guidance when they are putting together their subaward documents, especially when considering concepts such as cost sharing. And we'll talk more about cost sharing in part 2, so we go into more some of our more intermediate or advanced concepts that we're going to be covering in these 2 sessions. When we are issuing new subawards, the PI in the department should be notifying us of when there is a new subaward to issue, so they should be contacting their OSR person who worked on the award, or it might be someone in IGHS that's helping them with getting the request done. They should be confirming, so the PI in the department should be confirming that the agreement type is correct before they submit that request to us. If the subrecipient is foreign, it was not included in the proposal, sponsor prior approval is required for federal flow-through funds. We really want to call that out. The staff in OSR, the proposals and grant staff, or person who worked on the award, or the IGHS staff who's helping this PI and department, should also be looking at that agreement type determination at the time of issuing the new sub to make sure that it's correct. Preparing and compiling the request, which includes the subaward request form and other things that we'll talk about on the next slide, and submitting the request to the OSR subcontracts team. Remember, to complete and submit their SRF, you must have taken the SRF e-course. You must have completed the SRF e-course, and there's a link to that in here. Many of you have already done it, so yay. And if you haven't, it is available to you in the UC Learning Center. Again, we have a link later on. And at this time is when the subcontracts team would see it. You notice they weren't involved at the proposal stage. They're going to get involved when it comes to issuing subawards. And they're going to review the request to make sure that they have everything they need. They're going to complete the compliance checks, including to make sure it complies with UCSF, federal regulations, sponsor regulations, and any in-country or foreign government regulations or policies that we must also be following. They'll be preparing the subaward agreement and working with the subrecipient to obtain that signed agreement. They're also going to be looking at the agreement type to make sure it's correct. They will check it. And if not, then I imagine they'll be kicking it back to you with that. And as a note, as I just said, everyone needs to complete that SRF e-course to be eligible to submit the SRFs directly to the subcontracts team. And that just means you don't have to go through the OSR proposals and grant staff. And as a note, they also, if they're going to be submitting that form, they have to have completed that e-course as well. If you have any questions about that, you can always reach out to us and let us know.
Hey, Cassie, just to add in as well about the determination, sometimes, when looking at the project, it is it could go to procurement, it could become a subaward, that sort of thing. As long as you have documented backup, discussion is not the right word, I can't think of it, but as long as you have documentation sort of backing up and that sort of determination, justification for why you did a subaward, that could help, because for some of those where it's a little borderline, where it could go one way or another, if my team sees it, if we can see that there was at least a discussion about it and some sort of determination was made and that here's the justification, sort of thing, we can kind of go with that. And if we have any extra questions, we can follow up, but at least we can see what some of the thinking is, as opposed to when we get the requests and the scope of work is one sentence and it's not really clear and we can't necessarily find any of that information. If you're ever looking for something on the FDP website, they have it's an Excel document where you can fill it out, but it kind of goes through the determination of sub versus vendor, and it's looking at those very specific factors under 2 CFR 200.331 and looking at that. So if you're looking at something, you can kind of go through, and at the end of the day, there is still some discretion. But, for stuff that is clearly a procurement, it should go through procurement. Stuff that's clearly a sub should come through us. And so, just a couple other thoughts. It's just, one, speed isn't a reason to send it to one office or another, nor is budgetary constraints or budgetary decisions. So don't just budget something as a sub because it saves on indirects. At the end of the day, both of those are still potential audit findings. If that project is audited and the auditors question why we why we process something as a sub over procurement or vice versa.
Yeah, thank you, Philip. That's really good. And also, when they're submitting that request to you and if they have this additional information, where would you want them to provide that? On the SRF in the comment section or in the email body?
Not in the email, because we don't really look at the emails. I'll be honest, because they just come in and that isn't stuff that's actually been reviewed and approved by the PI. So if there's extra information in there, we may not necessarily see it or pay attention to it. So definitely just go ahead and attach it to the SRF, or if you have a special comment, you can add it to the comment section as well. And this can also be included in the proposal packet as well, and so it can be uploaded into e-proposal, or if it was a prior approval, it could be uploaded into Cactus, and you can notate that it's like, discussion about this is in e-proposal or something like that as well.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. And to complete the SRF again, that e-course goes through helping you learn how to actually complete it and what's required. And there's also instructions on our website. So I won't go into how to complete the form itself, but I do want to mention that when you are requesting a new sub-award be issued, we do need a completed SRF that includes all of the required information and documents based on your action. We need the commitment form. Again, this could be the MCA if the subrecipient is a UC campus, the letter of intent if it's an FDP expanded clearinghouse member, or the subrecipient commitment form if the subrecipient is not a UC campus or FDP expanded clearinghouse member. We also need the statement or scope of work, the budget and budget justification, and any other information is applicable to your specific award, your specific project, your specific sponsor. And you submit the SRF and required materials to the OSR subcontracts team via email. You can attach the documents that are required along with that SRF to the SRF itself, that PDF, or to the email as individual documents. So now let's move on to award administration. And what I really want to focus on right now are sub-award amendments, because I do have a question. What is the subrecipient commitment form? The subrecipient commitment form is a form that's required. And so we always need some type of commitment form, right? And it's basically providing us the information that we need from that subrecipient, and also letting us know that it's approved basically from them, right? So they are agreeing to commit to this sub-award. And that's what a subrecipient commitment form is. Now, there are 3 different versions, if you will, that you might need to use. And if your subrecipient is another UC campus, if it's UC Berkeley, UC Davis, UC Irvine, any of the other UC campuses, the commitment form is the MCA, and it's required at proposal stage and at the award issuing stage. Things can change in between, and so we do need it at both times. If the subrecipient is not a UC campus, but is a member of the FDP expanded clearinghouse, which there's a link to the list on this page. It's also at the website that Philip linked earlier, just on a different section of that website. And that is the letter of intent. And that's what's required, that serves as the commitment form if they're an FDP participating member. If they are neither of those, then we would need the subrecipient commitment form. So I hope that answered your question, but the links are here for those forms so that you can easily find them. And they're letting us know that that it's approved to go through. So yeah, Shelby, I see Shelby has her hand raised. So Shelby.
I would just mention that sometimes it's overlooked that these forms are important because they help us foster positive relationships with our partnering institutions. And I say this because, we've had Stanford, for example, reach out to us and remind us that we need to be engaging in this initial preliminary institutional approval when we're subbing out to them. This helps make sure they're getting the IDC they expect, and we're not getting put in a position of not giving them what they expect when it comes at the time of award. So I would just say I think this is really helpful to follow this process and use the commitment forms. It helps us protect those relationships. and not put us in difficult conversations with them at the time of award.
Thank you, Shelby. That is a really, really good point that I'm glad you brought up, because it does help foster those relationships for sure, and making sure that we're using the correct one. We're asking for the right information as well, and not something else. I think is important. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to go back to award administration. So let's go back to where I was going. And what I want to talk about mainly here on this slide is the award amendments. Subaward amendments are submitted to the OSR subcontracts team, and we need a subaward. So there needs to be a subaward amendment issued for the next year or additional funding. As we know, like NIH funds, usually they'll fund say a 5-year project, but then they fund in budget periods or 1-year increments. So this would be to add, say your subaward was entering year 2, this would be to add that year 2 of funding. Also is required when there's additional funding to a current period, no cost extensions, early terminations, changes in the UCSF or subrecipient PI also require an amendment, changes in scope of work, carry forward approval, and a funding decrease. These are all examples of when a subaward amendment needs to be issued, and there may be other changes as well. To request a subaward amendment, the PI or the department will notify OSR or maybe IGHS if you're helping them of so if you're helping the PI, so to issue that a subaward amendment needs to be issued. The PI or the department needs to let us know, and also serve as the sub. OSR proposals and grants or awards or IGHS staff would be reviewing the amendment request, making sure that you have everything that you need, that it's the correct request, preparing and completing the request, and is including collecting all of that required and materials for that actual action, which we'll talk about requirements in a moment. And then also submitting that request to the OSR subcontracts team. So this is the SRF and all of those requirements. And I'll go over a little bit about what needs to be attached in the next slide, but it's really important to take that SRFE course. It goes into all of this in a lot more detail and really goes through the form with you, so you can learn how to complete it and make sure you have all of the information that you need. And then the OSR subcontracts team will review the request. They'll again complete those compliance checks, and they'll work on getting that amendment agreement prepared and signed with the subrecipient. Again, even if you're doing an amendment request, anytime you are the person that's completing and submitting that SRF to the OSR subcontracts team, you must have completed the SRF e-course. All right. Are there any questions about amendments or any comments? One thing I want to note is that the only time you provide your budget, your scope of work, your budget justification and such during an amendment is when they've changed from the original, from that previous one. So you only provide your documents when they're actually revised. The subcontracts team doesn't need them if they didn't change. All right. So we really talked about where OSR is involved in this process, but there are other things. There's the subaward administration and subrecipient monitoring that we're not really involved in. We're not involved in, but the department and the PI are, the subrecipient are, contracts and grants accounting, and accounts payable are. This is part of the graph taken from the controller's office. There's a link to the full graph here. And basically, it just goes through kind of what's going on. So you can see that the subrecipient is conducting the work and submitting their invoices. Accounts payable is creating the vouchers and starting the approval process. The department and the PI are monitoring the subrecipient throughout this whole time and reviewing and approving invoices. The subrecipient resolves any issues prior to payment, and accounts payable pays the subrecipient. That is that kind of top bar. And again, the department and the PI are doing this monitoring throughout the whole process. Then the subrecipient is completing the work, submitting reports and final invoices. Accounts payable is creating the vouchers, starting the approval process. The department and the PI review and retain reports, review and approve invoices. The subrecipient, again, has to resolve any issues that might not allow them to get paid. Accounts payable pays that invoice, and CGA completes the financial reporting closeout process. This is kind of that the administration and subrecipient monitoring process that doesn't involve us. And I really, really encourage you to learn more from the UCSF Controller's Office about this. They have some great how-to guides and things to really help you along the way. This is one where you're moving it into the correct order. So that's the activity here. So these are our steps. And what you'll need to do is indicate what order it goes in. The first step out of all of these steps that I included for you would be to identify that outgoing scope of work. We really, really need to know what the subrecipient will be doing before we can then determine the agreement type. So we identify what they're doing, and that with some other things, there's other factors that go into it as well. But then we would be determining the agreement type. And during these two kind of steps in between, the PI would be thinking about the subrecipient's capacity to carry out their responsibilities. It's really dependent on their scope as well as the agreement type. If it's a subaward, for example, are they able to comply with the flow down terms and conditions from our prime sponsor? The next step out of all the steps I mentioned are listed for you would be to prepare the subaward request, including the SRF and any required information. And then the subaward team could complete the compliance checks. Oops. And negotiate the subaward agreement. And what I want you to do right now, if you could match the role with the responsibility. So what you have listed are the responsibilities that you can see on the right of my screen. And then you're going to match it with the role. Does that responsibility match the PI? When we say IGHS or OSR, we're talking about, you know, the proposals and grant staff, the group that worked on the award. And then we have our subcontracts team, which is also part of OSR, but it's not always that clear of a distinction, but I think, you know, for the activity today, we need to do that. I drew my line. We've got our principal investigator, and of the responsibilities listed, they would be responsible for evaluating the subrecipient's capacity to carry out their responsibilities. They're identifying the subrecipient. That really is something that they're in a unique position to do because they're deciding who they're going to be working with. And then they are also going to be determining the agreement type at the proposal stage. The IGHS or OSR proposals grants awards team would be responsible for ensuring the agreement type is compliant with the applicable policies, collecting the subrecipient budget documents, and preparing the SRF. Out of the things listed here, our OSR subcontracts team is responsible for negotiating the subaward agreement and completing the compliance checks. One thing I want to note is that I really want to pull out why we don't have the ensuring the agreement type is compliant with applicable policies. That's not the OSR subcontracts team responsibility. They do look at it when it comes in for them to issue to see if it's right, but it's actually the responsibility of the PI to determine it, and then the group that's working with them on submitting that request, preparing that request to make sure that it's the right agreement type. That way, by the time it gets to the sub-out team, it is right. And basically, it should have been done at the proposal stage if there was a proposal. All right. Do we have? Well, actually, let's just move to questions. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Philip to see if there's anything that he wants to share. And we can see if you have questions. If you do, please put them in chat. That we can make sure that we get them all addressed.
I mean, I don't have anything additional to add. I think we've kind of covered a lot, but just want to see what questions folks have, scenarios, like, anything. Feel free.
Okay, I have, let's see, I've got a question. Are capital advances allowed to be carried forward to future years only if there is automatic carry forward, or do they need to be closed each year if the carry forward is restricted?
So the working capital advance and carry forward actually have nothing to do with each other. They're completely separate. So whether the award is automatic carry forward or not, and when what carry forward we give to the subsite isn't really germane to working capital advances. Now, I actually was just talking with Ellen yesterday about something, and we were talking about how at one point the working capital advances, we were kind of requiring them to be reconciled each year, but have, over the years, it's kind of been realized that that can create some financial liabilities, especially with the foreign currency conversions, especially in some regions where sometimes the currency fluctuates a little more. That can be, either cause a detriment, because if they have to return the funds, then we just send it to them back. It can cause a lot of problems. So the working capital advance, if it wasn't completely reconciled at the end of that year, we can carry it, we can move it over to the next year. And honestly, the idea, also keep in mind, the idea behind the working capital advance is to provide that working capital for the entire life of the project. So, this is easy to think of in terms of NIH and how they fund it in a year by year sort of function. But if we know that the subsite's going to be there all 5 years, and let's say each year it's $120,000, I'm doing this because the math is easy at $10,000 a month. We give them a $20,000 advance, and they should be able to carry that from the very beginning to the very end of that sub award. And so that at the very end, it gets reconciled. I know that this isn't always how it works, and it's very different how different subrecipients may reconcile the advance, and how some departments might manage it as well. And that's totally okay. There's some flexibility there. I just ask that when we, if we've done year one, and for year two, let's say they reconciled some of the advance, but they don't have all of it, what we can do is go ahead and replenish that advance, so it brings it back up to the 2 months of the annual amount. So using that same scenario, $120,000 each year, $20,000 would be the advance. Let's say, and this is a simple scenario, no upfront cost, that sort of thing. $20,000. Let's say they reconciled 5,000 of it, so they still have 15,000 on hand. We can, in that year two amendment that adds year two, we can say, hey, why don't we can replenish, make sure you have it on hand. We're going to replenish the advance, so you're back up to $20,000. So yeah, Donna, this is different than an increase. So let's say from year one was only $120,000. Year two is $240,000, and that's what years like 2, 3, 4, 5 are going to be. That's a little different. So now really 2 months of their annual amount would be $40,000 instead of 20. And we can increase the working capital advance so that they have 40,000 on hand for that remaining time. That's different than just replenishing the advance, because sometimes on the invoices and when things get paid out, maybe at the last invoice at the end of year one, their invoice was $6,000, and it was said to put that against the advance. Well, let's say they now, using that example of $20,000 working capital advance, now they only have $14,000 on hand. If we replenish their advance up to 20, it's not increasing the advance. It's just making sure that they have that 20,000 on hand. But yes, if the amount increases from 1 year to the next, we can increase the advance, and we would increase it up to whatever 2 months of that annual amount is.
All right, I have some more questions.
Sure.
Great, keep them coming, everybody. I have 2 more. So does the subaward site PI have to be named key personnel on an NIH proposal when the prime is NIH? Oh, before you answer that though, there's another advanced question, and maybe we can stick to that. Can subs have multiple advances if the project is different?
What do you mean if the project is different? Maybe that might help guide.
You have 5 different projects with the same sub. I'm just making something up.
Yeah.
They could have multiple.
So and we would have different subs to them, right? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So then each sub could have an advance because they are I'm just going to use this as an example. You're working with Muhas, and they're on, let's say you have a big, I'm going to use NIH again because it's what's coming to my mind, but you have a big P grant, and let's say there's an administrative core, and they're on 2 of the projects, and the way you're managing it, you've decided to issue them separate subs. We can do an advance for each of those subs because each sub is different, even though it's all going to the same institution under that same prime award. Each sub is different, and so we can do an advance for each of those subs.
So each sub award or subcontract, each sub award is, the agreement is different, but the sub recipient institution is like the same.
Yeah. You see that occasionally. That does happen, but not so often. But it does happen that we have multiple subs to the same institution.
Sure. Okay. So thank you. I think Donna agreed that was good. All right. So now, does the subaward site PI have to be named key personnel if it's an NIH proposal? So do they have to be named key personnel on the UCSF project if they're a subrecipient PI?
I'll take that question.
Okay.
I mean, Joyce, I also just want to find out what's the what is the person trying to ask? I don't quite, I mean, I get what they're asking.
If you have a sub award, right? You have a sub award, their site PDPI, their principal investigator there. Does that person need to be named as key personnel on the UCSF project?
You mean in the application?
On the application.
So they would be listed as senior key person.
Right.
Yes. So they would be listed as senior key person because to be the principal investigator of a sub-award, they would have to meet the definition of key personnel, which means that they are responsible for the design and conduct and reporting of the project. So they have a programmatic responsibility. So they would be listed as senior key person on the application. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, and I don't
that answers the way I understand it. Yeah.
Why wouldn't you list them as key personnel? And then, I know this is like something that comes up often. Like, yes, this is related to a sub award, but it may not really be a question for my team. It may be more of a question for proposals of grants or someone else. And so that's what I'm also trying to understand is like, I feel like there's something else to this question, and I'm not really following, what are the implications? Like, is the person concerned about the implications of this or not? And something like that. So
it also could have just been a question of curiosity. So I don't know if there's a specific example in mind. But if so, the person who asked, feel free to chime in if you want to add some more to that, and we could explore it more.
I just want to make sure that we are answering the question
No, I think we are. I've gotten this
Okay.
question before in my other university. So, and I don't remember why it came up, but I've definitely been
Okay.
asked that before. All right. So then I have another one. When we determine that we have a foreign subaward at proposal stage based on the scope of work, who should we contact in URSO to alert them for their foreign policy compliance check? And what information do they need from OSR, proposals and grants specialist? Will there be additional steps once URSO is looped in that need to be documented or completed prior to proposal submission?
Sorry. You can always start with me, and I can route you to the right person in our office. If it's an international agreement or an international hiring issue, that's Gladys. If it's a global programs country and you want to know about the services there, we would route you to Jane. We don't have anything at the proposal stage where we have to approve. We are here just as guidance. So it's more about highlighting and understanding issues early so we can tackle them. Sometimes it's like making sure that we have some padding in the budget if we need to, for example, get advice from local legal counsel. But we wouldn't have anything where we have to review it and approve it at this point in time. We're just here for advising. So it's more if maybe there's some new area of work or a question you might have, we're here to provide guidance.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and add to that as well. I think some of it is if it's a foreign subaward, and it's clearly a subaward, like that may not necessarily need to involve. We may not necessarily need to go to URSO or anything like that. But if you're not really clear what the person's doing, and it might venture into like what was kind of mentioned before about the independent contracting agreement, that might be something definitely, maybe we want to check in with URSO to see if it really does meet that definition, if that's really what's going on. I think it's one of those things that if you see something and it doesn't seem really right, or you have questions, that's when it's good to pull them in, because they have that expertise about the international work. But if it's a subaward, then probably you won't need to go to URSO. There might be something we want to like ping them on, or Jane's group, especially for global programs. There might be something we want to loop them in on, especially in countries that they work with. They might, if we're having problems or difficulty finding an international partner in some of those countries, they might be able to help out with that, and so that might be something we can bring them in on. But then something else you can kind of keep in mind as well. We all have access to this program called Visual Compliance, and you can do restricted party screening. And I believe Export Control has a little training on it in the UC Learning Center. That can be really helpful, because at proposal stage, if you know that you're already, I'm just going to use this as an example. I don't know that we'd be doing a project right now in Ukraine, but if you were going to be doing a project in Ukraine, you might want to do a visual compliance screening. You might want to look into this just a little bit more to see if it's something that we can even work on. So while that may not involve going to Joe's group, it may involve going to some other groups and finding out, should we actually be moving forward with this sub or not? It's something my team does. We do that visual compliance screening at the beginning of every subs, and whenever a sub PI changes, we do a rescreening. But we always include the country, so we'll get country alert codes, that let us know, hey, we have some programs in Vietnam, and I'm just using them as an example because their country alert code comes up every time. We still have export control restrictions with Vietnam, and so we can't just send any materials there, or even if we're traveling, we can't just take any materials there. So, it might be good at the proposal stage to start thinking about that. There may not be anything you necessarily need to include in the proposal at that point, but it might be worth, if you know that there's a country alert code, or you think there might be one, run visual compliance, maybe reach out to export control to see if there's any added guidance that they want to provide at that stage.
Great. Thank you, Philip and Joe. I appreciate that. the official portion of today is over, unless any of my colleagues want to add anything. All right, so thank you everybody.